Bubak by Slaughter's Back. Have you ever heard of Bubak? The sack man, as locals refer to it. My family first arrived in Poland, or Czech Lane, as my father jokingly calls it, on a plane from Frankfurt, Germany. We arrived in a small town named Östrun, where we settled in for the next few years of my life. I can still remember my childhood home. It was this wonderful red brick hut at the end of the street near the woods. The transfer to the new country was, well, difficult to say the least. But with my grandmother holding my hand every step of the way, I managed. I can still remember her toothy grin, that one mole on her nose. More than anything, though, she loved her garden. The one thing that could still give her joy, apart from us, of course, was the massive garden hidden behind the house's lengthy exterior. The garden had to be protected. That's why she had it. Sitting in the green shed behind our bicycles and resting in between 6 large jars of jam was a scarecrow. I can't exactly tell you what it was, but the thing always gave me an uneasy feeling. The aged straw it was made out of, or the tattered clothes of children it wore, really didn't bother me. It was its eyes. They were strained, human-like, and the color was completely sickening, a rotting, almost fleshy pink. I always had a strange feeling about it. The way the eyes followed me, the way the thing's hands were always just too close to me. Still, I never actually broke down crying at the sight of it, but it was definitely strange. Then it started to get into my head. I forgot this happened, maybe when I was around 4. I had a dream, a very, very vivid dream. My little mind began racing. It's going to hurt her, I thought. It's going to kill Grandma and stuff her. How such ridiculous things came over me, I don't know. The logic of my idea wasn't important at the time. All I knew was that I had to stop it, destroy it even. In the middle of the night, around 11:30, I grabbed the head shears from the basement and made my way towards the shed. On my way, I perched the door to Grandma's room open. She was still sound asleep. Cautiously, I pushed into the shed door. A sudden jolt of energy and it opened. The lunge forward startled me. My elbow came crashing through one of the windows. I collapsed in pain, clenching my teeth and observing my arm. Multiple shards of glass were now wedged into my skin. The pain, for someone my age, was nearly unbearable. But I had to push forward. I had to save her. Our bicycles were in direct view now. The blood from my hand now made a small trail on the floor. I unhooked the bicycles one by one and moved them aside. My eyes widened. The scarecrow was not in its usual spot between the jars of jam. A cold clamped down on my shoulder. It was Grandma. Even though she was concealed in darkness, I could practically see her expression by the tone of her voice. She was angered, frightened even, and rightfully worried about me. Grandma dragged me inside the house. "Bastard child," she muttered under her breath. I reached down to comfort her. I was not yet aware that I was the cause of her stress. Both of her hands came crashing down on my shoulders. She had me in a firm grasp. "You listen to me," she whispered, her voice strained. "You will never go in there. Never." I nodded. My eyes began to swell up with tears. It was that exact moment that her anger wore away. "Come, I'll make you 2 pierogi. Then you will go to bed." After I ate, Grandma offered to read me to sleep. She nurtured me with a mother's love, the kind of love I'd never received. She was reading me a tale about a vicious spider who ties its victims in an unbreakable string to preserve their flesh, and about a brave knight who ventured to slay it. The whole time she looked sick. ghastly. I could see it in her eyes, so much so that she closed the book halfway through and wished me good night. "Grandma?" I asked as she flipped off the light. "Where has the scarecrow gone?" Her soft, motherly smile faded. "Gone," she replied. "I burned it." Confusion grasped me throughout the night. I rolled in my bed, wondering, how did she know? I had never told anyone of my fear, nor did my face easily give it away. I was scared, for the first time in my life. Besides that incident, I had a pretty good childhood. My dad spoiled me with gifts every Christmas, much to my siblings' dismay. I was constantly surrounded by friends at school. Then I turned 14. My life changed. The rivalry between me and my siblings, although not as childish, was just as intense. It got to the point where one of the little shits, Luca, nearly strangled me with a leather belt. Things were the worst between him and I. Then, one day, Dad proposed taking a hike. Luca wandered off the trail. Grandma insisted he would find his way back. Dad didn't buy it, and frankly, I didn't either. But I trusted Grandma. I kept my mouth shut. We never saw him again. Dad and I were ruined. I began seeing him, and not just in my dreams. The funeral reception was relatively small, as Dad thought it would be appropriate only to invite close relatives. Mum had insisted that she come. Just the image of my mother brought Dad back memories of the divorce. Merely thinking about the divorce made him angry. The anger and depression haunted him night after night. Needless to say, he declined Mum's pleas. Dad fell into yet another depression, this one worse than the last. He barely left his room, much less to go to work. Tensions between him and Grandma were high. They broke into fights. The fights, at first merely verbal shouting, escalated into violence. Police officers appeared at my house the next day asking to speak to Grandma. Dad had disappeared in his car for a quick drive. He never came back. It was too much for me. I ran away, but eventually I had to return home. Of my original 5 relatives, including my mum, only me, Nico, and Grandma remained. Grandma seemed unfazed by the disappearances, though. She fiercely refused to speak about them. Nico and I shared only a handful of interests: soccer, mythology, and filmmaking. Mild depression plagued us. I was 16, Nico was 10. Grandma encouraged us to bond. It was she who gave us the idea for the documentary, a massive film reel depicting the many supernatural events occurring throughout Poland. I went online and searched for Polish paranormal legends. No results. I deleted my search and typed Polish haunted locations. 200 results appeared. One stood out in particular: Wedrony Forest, Ostrin, Poland. After plugging the exact location into my phone, I discovered it was only 2 blocks. Not as big as the woods near my home, yet decently sized. My brother asked Grandma to borrow some of her filming equipment. Then we began. The first few minutes of the film were nothing exceedingly special. A picture of the house overlapped with Nico's voice, introducing us and the documentary. There wasn't really all that much to document. We basically just showed our viewer around the house. Nico and I agreed that we would have to save a trip to the forest for our finale. For now, though, a short clip of me walking down the basement steps near midnight would be satisfying. I wasn't entirely sure there would be any paranormal activity in our house specifically, but even if not, we hoped that the very idea would terrify our audience. Nico was much too much of a pussy to do it himself, so I went. To be honest, I was also terrified. Grandma usually forbid us from entering the basement throughout the day, much less in the middle of the night. Slowly, I inched my way down the stairs and into the dark abyss. My heart pounded with every step. I didn't have the courage to make it all the way down. Halfway was good enough. I sat up, positioned the camera so it was overlooking the basement itself, and waited. Nothing. The only present sounds were my lengthened breaths and the boiler further downstairs. The whole concept suddenly seemed so childish and naive. Then I heard something. I listened. The sound neared until the empty soup can rolled into view and stopped inches from me. I rose from my spot and my legs felt weak. It was as if they might give at any moment. The hanging lamp attached to the ceiling flickered to life. A shadow overlapped the soup can. I inched away. My camera was still on. A figure came into view. A child. Its face vacant blue, its eyes missing from their sockets. The child wore no clothes apart from the few inches of fabric it had wrapped around its right arm. It reached for the can. It spotted me. It smiled. I screamed in utter horror and practically trampled myself as I hurried up the stairs. The creature gave chase. It carried a disgusting odor with it. My hand was on the doorknob, which I promptly twisted and pulled. 2 hands from upstairs powerfully grabbed me and pulled me up. It was Grandma, still in her cooking apron. The breaths I was drawing in seemed unreal, as if I shouldn't have survived. I glanced over my shoulder. The creature had vanished into the darkness. The light switched off. Grandma grabbed me by my ear and pulled me into my room. Believe me, I tried to reason with her. Nothing came through. I offered to show her the video. She ripped the phone out of my hand and threw it down the stairway.
"Spoiled little shit," she scolded. "This is exactly why your father died, Ethan. He never listened, even as a man."
She threw me into my room. Nico had already drifted off and was oblivious to the commotion.
"You will stay in here until further notice. Is that understood, child?"
I nodded. My face was wet and drained of colour. Grandma nodded and slammed the door shut. Spoiled little shit. I lunged over and hurled. My mucus-covered hands were still shaking. The odour had seemingly followed me. I reached into my pocket for a tissue. An aged fabric of some kind brushed against the tip of my finger. I pulled it out and examined it. It was a white piece of cloth, with marker writing smeared across it. "Kill the witch," it read. "Break the spell." My grandma's hostile attitude seemingly vanished at breakfast. I left my room despite her orders, not that she seemed to notice. The only incident left my head within the span of a few weeks. I convinced myself that it was my wild imagination or Nico trying to mess with me. Deep inside, I knew what had happened, and that night was real. I just couldn't face it alone. Nico and I continued our documentary. Grandma eventually gave us permission to hike a small trail I had discovered near our woods. The visit didn't provide us with any paranormal sightings, but we did get some nice footage to show the viewers while talking in between clips. Finally, the time came. With Grandma's permission, we trekked into the woods and prepared to finish our project. The woods had a long-running stream which we planned to follow. We filmed our journey up the river before explaining to the viewers that we had to shut off the camera and head home for equipment. Nico slathered his arms in mud and, yes, animal feces. He had grown a kind of attachment to the whole concept of the documentary and was willing to take strange risks to achieve it. Another 2 minutes of walking and we arrived at our destination. the ruins of a wooden hut near the heart of the forest. I turned on the camera and filmed myself walking towards the house, shaking it and speaking inaudibly for effect. The plan was relatively simplistic. Nico would hide inside of the house and attempt to grab me once I neared it, being cautious only to show his arm. Sure, it was a childish and unrealistic idea, but the thought of it made us hopeful we could claim to have caught supernatural events on camera. My hand fell on the loose bronze handle attached to the hut's entrance. The bushes behind me began to shake. I turned off the camera and dropped it in frustration. "Damn it, you had one job!" The rustling in the bushes continued. There was no answer from Nico.
Ethan?
My throat closed up. I could feel the color draining from my face. A slender, gloved hand reached through the bushes. Nico and I backed away from the sight, still not entirely sure what to do. A pair of slant yellow eyes followed it. A pointed hat was visible now as well. We ran. Adrenaline took hold of me. I shrieked wildly as someone began clawing at my back. I glanced over my shoulder. Only Nico. We slowed to a halt on the opening of the woods. And we laughed. I didn't know exactly what we found so funny. I still don't know. Nico and I headed home. Grandma welcomed us at the door and barraged us with questions.
How was it? What did you see? Were you hurt?
The smile on her face seemed fake, superficial. Still, we denied having come across anything interesting during our trip. Just before bed, I made a quick trip to the shed and grabbed a Gatorade from the cooler. As I was closing the cooler lid, something caught my eye. I maneuvered across the creaking floorboards and unhooked our bicycles, moving them aside. There, lying in a sitting position between 6 jars of jam, was a scarecrow. It was still smiling. A cool autumn breeze cycles through my bedroom window, soothing my tense muscles as I lay in bed. Still, I am not calm. I think over the day's events. The whole day was a blur, and memories more or less swam motionlessly in my head, crashing in every which direction. I close my eyes and slowly, but surely, begin to drift off into a deep sleep. I had a strange dream that night. I can't exactly recall it, though. What I can recall was waking up to the sound of somebody pounding on the glass slide door leading onto the balcony. I perched up, forcefully holding in my exhale. The pounding changed into a melodic, almost rhythmical tapping. The back of my throat clogged as I heard the door sliding open. It stopped with a thud on the end of the track. The floorboards began creaking, followed by footsteps. The footsteps neared and neared and neared until a shadow loomed over me. My breaths became short and frantic. I pressed my back against the bed's wooden frame. The shadow limped forward, now barely illuminated by the red LED lamp. It was a scarecrow, reeking of vomit and gasoline, its eyes empty sockets, each with a yellow slit, acting like the thing's actual eyes, stitching right across its face, forming a sickening smile. It wore a brown hat and clothes, also reeking of gasoline. I couldn't move. My only thought was to bury myself in my covers and cower. The creature leaned forward. I could smell flesh off of its breath, and its eyes narrowed on me.
"It will be better this way,"
it hissed, flicking its black tongue. My instincts took over. I bolted out of the bedroom and hurtled into the darkness of the corridor. The creature stood, motionless, watching me. It gave a childish giggle and watched me disappear into the murk. I ran downstairs, looking for Grandma, hollering her name, No answer except for the sound of my own voice echoing off the basement walls. I passed the boiler room, past the storage closet. I stopped in my tracks, a rotting over coming over me. A familiar one. I spun around and saw something lying on the table. The apparent source of the smell. Even from such a short distance, the thing was blanketed in shadows. Luckily, a small ceiling lamp dangled from above. I pulled the short chain attached to it, turning it on. My eyes swelled. I wish I had never turned the light on. How I wish I'd never went to that damn basement in the first place. Luca was on the table. Not just Luca. Luca's corpse, nearly completely covered in a strange pasta holding together hay, wool, and straw. Stitches ran across his rotting face, stretching his mouth into a smile. Only the face was visible.
I had to conserve the body, Ethan. It was the only way.
Grandma's voice seemed solemn, sincere. I pulled myself back to reality. Luca was dead. And now, after years of an enigma, I knew why. You murdered him. I spun around, Grandma donning a lovely, mothering smile. Her posture was stretched and welcoming.
Oh, my baby. It had to be done.
Tears began to stream down her face. Still, she continued. Every inch she took forward, her smile weakened.
He only feasts on the souls. But the souls cannot exist if the flesh disappears. I preserved him, Ethan. I'm saving him.
Bullshit! Grandma stood still. Her face twisted into a mixture of disappointment and anger.
It had to be done. I had to protect the family.
I just realized there was a second silhouette inches away from her, eyeing me from the shadows. The figure limped out of the shadows. Bubak's smile widened. He held out his arms, following after Grandma, miming her. I turned back to my brother's corpse, holding it in my hands. Grandma let out a soft chuckle. Bubak's hand was now grabbing hold of her shoulder. Tears streaked down her face.
He would have wanted this, Ethan. I know he would.
You don't know my fucking brother! I charged forward, knocking her from her feet. She collapsed on the floor. Bubak let out a maniacal laugh and chased after me up the stairs. The door was locked. The demon neared me. His grin had vanished. His eyes were no longer dirty yellow. They were human, practically bulging out of their sockets. I busted through the door and into the living room, then towards a sliding back door leading into the garden. I didn't stop running until I reached the local supermarket, from which I contacted the police. The police brought me to some kind of rehabilitation facility where I spent the night. I was then moved into a temporary fostering home the next day. I couldn't eat for a few days, much less could I sleep. It's over, I kept telling myself. But of course it was never over. I couldn't really tell any of these psychiatrist chicks what had happened. How could I? My name was Ethan Cochen. My grandmother was a druggie and a child abuser. At least that's what I told them. But the truth was always in me. Nagging, no, clawing its way out. Hell, that's why I'm writing this. I hadn't found out what happened after I ran until my 21st birthday when I got a guy working for social services to cough it out. Obviously, he wouldn't give me the whole truth no matter how many bills I waved in his face. But from what he did tell, Grandma was found dead by the time police arrived. She was laying on the stairs, her stomach ripped open with a cold smile on her face. She had covered herself in salt a natural preserver. They found Dad and Nico's bodies hidden in the wine cellar, also coated in salt. Years later, after some friends and I had returned to that forest, the hut had vanished without a trace, although we did discover something else. An enormous field of scarecrows, about 2 acres big, hidden behind a blanket of trees and bushes. I had my friend Philip pick one out at random. Nuka is still resting there today. I moved to the States some time later. My life went on. I got a job, got married, had kids. But the afterthought of what could have happened continued to haunt me. I returned to my hometown several years later with my wife. The kids stayed at a nice inn while I ventured into the forest. I told her I had something to show. We stopped in the scarecrow fields in front of a short one wearing the blue beret. She giggled gently and kissed me on the cheek. "I'm heading out to the car. Feel free to join me." I stood there for a while, looking up at it. My brother was alive. He always will be. I smiled. And it smiled back.